This is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Welcome back to our show. I'm so very happy to have Peter Huessy back with us. For 45 years, Dr. Peter Huessy has worked to protect the United States from nuclear war. Sustaining or improving deterrence keeps the USA safe and prosperous. Unfortunately, the threats do not end or necessarily get better. Dr. Huessy established his company in 1981 to help the U.S. military, the Congress, and the aerospace industry to better understand how to sustain deterrence. Dr. Huessy worked with the Air Force, Personnel Center, the National Defense University, the Hudson Institute, as partners in this work, and now with the National Institute of Deterrence Studies. Dr. Huessy writes a weekly nuclear report, hosts a year-long series of nuclear seminars, and since 2010, created and hosted some 28 nuclear triad symposiums at various USA military bases around the country. He has written over 2,000, imagine that, 2,000 reports and essays on security issues while regularly appearing on radio and on television. Welcome to our show, Dr. Huessy.
It's always a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Peter is going to talk about China and Russia in the Arctic.
Yes, we don't often hear of the Arctic as a place of conflict or confrontation, but given what we now know is up there, there's a whole lot of reasons why the Russians and the Chinese are interested. Now, China is not an Arctic country. They
What
call
is up there?
They call themselves a near Arctic country. And they have piggybacked on Russian work, and it's in three areas which they talk about publicly. One is research. And it's interesting, they say it's research about global warming, which is the ice melting. That's the big issue. The second thing they talk about is a legitimate issue, which is shipping. If the ice recedes and the waterway gets bigger, it all of a sudden becomes very viable for commercial shipping going from one part of the globe to the other and cuts off weeks of travel. So it's cheaper. Now, when the ice comes back and the sea narrows, then you no longer can use it, but you can use it at a certain time of the year. The third thing is oil and gas exploration, which Russia wants to claim as its own. In fact, it has very extensive claims to the Arctic, not unlike China's claims to the South China Sea. China is willing to put up some of the cash in return for getting the oil and gas. So those are the three you could consider legitimate interests of anybody near the Arctic.
I think you should talk about each one separately.
Right. The problem is the Chinese and Russians are overlaying on this, building military facilities. And why is that a concern?
Or using this as an excuse to.
Well, it's cover. Mm-hmm. They can say, oh, we're just doing research, we're doing oil and gas exploration. And they say, well, you do that too. And it's true. But here's the problem. If you do look at the top of a globe and do the distance from the Arctic to the northern United States of America, just Montana and Maine, for example, it's a very, very short time distance. And if you have cruise missiles that are, we talk about hypersonics. Hypersonics just means a certain multiple of the speed of sound. Right now you have ICBMs that go 15,000 miles in an hour. So that's considerable, 15 or 20. And so we know how to do that, but those are missiles that go up in the air, travel through space, and from Russia, or from us to get to Russia or China, is 30 minutes. Now, it depends on the ocean where your submarine is. It can get to the United States or mainland Russia or China very quickly, depending on where you launch it from. But the key is when you have a small cruise missile, how much fuel can you put in it at what speed, because in the atmosphere you have a lot of turbulence and heat. That's why when our astronauts would come back from space, we were always worried about the heat shield. That's the shield on the capsule as it's going through the atmosphere, hurtling at thousands of miles an hour. That shield can burn up, and if it burns up, the capsule disintegrates in a fireball. And remember, we used to see sometimes a shingle would fly off the capsule, which is very dangerous because you wonder how close is that to the skin of the capsule. So a cruise missile launched from the Arctic, and particularly a place called Greenland,
Oh,
right
Greenland.
there, is it gets to the United States in a matter of minutes. Very difficult to pick up because it's a cruise missile low to the ground. It's following in its nose cone are pictures of the ground it's meant to go find.
It's almost like a bird.
That's how a cruise missile works. It goes and finds the territory that it has been programmed to go. So that's why it goes in a certain direction. And to pick it up and know it's been launched, number one, acquire it, meaning where is it going, and then third, to try to intercept it. That's what Golden Dome is about, in part, because this is a threat that we're worried about dramatically, and the issue is, more than anything, is swarming. They saturate an area with missiles like drones, which is what they've done. Iran and Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas were doing with Israel. And Israel's Iron Dome was a reaction to that. But now Iran found that the best way to go after drones, swarming drones, is basically what we used to call a Gatling gun. That's a gun that looks like a beehive of bullets that rotates, and the C-130 gunships can fire thousands and thousands of rounds in a few seconds. I've seen it operate at a base down in Florida. I remember seeing the thing. It makes a horrendous noise, but we put it in the back of a C-130 transport plane and turned it into a gunship. And that's why those are incredibly, the shells are this long. So when you put thousands of those in a rotary, but it is quite amazing. So the Israelis found that is the best way to deal with it. Their problem is swarming. They know that Iran and the bad guys will just saturate an area, and what happens is the radar goes, they're not quite sure what they see, and so it shuts down. And then on the other hand, you use up your inventory of interceptors, because, but in this last go-round in Israel, for example, they had 35,000 projectiles shot at them, rockets, missiles,
Wow.
and drones. 35,000. Now, I'm a Vermonter. I was born in Colorado. I have to get that in, but I was a Vermonter. Can you imagine if Montreal was launching one rocket at Burlington, Vermont, and it hit a apartment building? How fast would it be for the American people to demand that we take Montreal out? About 3 seconds, okay? Israel lives with, if you add in 2005, 2011, one was a huge attack by Hamas, the other was a huge attack by Hezbollah in terms of rockets. They've had over 100,000 rockets, missiles, and drones launched at Israel proper in the last, let's say, 20 years. And it's episodic, but nonetheless, this is what a country the size of basically New Jersey is. Take 100,000 rockets and launch them at New Jersey. The question is, what do you not hit? Okay? And the Israelis have been able to, prior to having missile defense of any kind, they had, I believe, one fatality for every 72 rockets, missiles, or
Wow.
drones that were launched at them. Once they put missile defense in place, the number shot up to 1,800. You see the value of missile defense. You go from losing one person for every 72 rockets launched at you to one out of every time. If they launch 1,800, you may lose a person. Now, the Israelis in the last go-round shot down nearly 95% of everything launched at them. Some stuff they didn't shoot down because it went into the desert, went into the ocean, and sometimes out of Gaza, a rocket would go straight up and come right back down where it was launched. Unfortunately, they were launching them from residences, where they would literally build a roof that opened up like a airplane hangar. So when you look at why the Arctic is so important, there are two things: distance and time. It's a very short distance and difficult to see,
Reaction time.
and the ability to pick up a rocket, know it's coming, find out where it's going, and as I said, intercept it becomes very, very difficult. So you want to keep the bad guys, Russia and China, out. You want to keep the terrorists down on the farm. Don't let them there. And you want the good guys making it a resource for the world. And this is very, very important. The United States has made the oceans safe for commercial traffic because our U.S. Navy. We didn't militarize the oceans. We made them safe for commerce. And it's very interesting. When John Kennedy was president in 1960, all worldwide commercial trade on the ocean, all of it, $87 billion. It's now $31 trillion. So did we make for more prosperity? Yes. Did we make for more economic growth and jobs and peaceful?
Opened up to the world, really.
However, the Houthis in the Red Sea and Suez, with the help of the Chinese, okay, the Houthis need to know where to go find a tanker or go find a commercial freighter. Well, they don't have GPS. Only three countries. Well, I don't know if China. I know Russia has it and we have it, and we didn't give it to them. So you do the math. The same thing with the Somalian pirates we heard about years ago. They were being given GPS by the Russians. Now, the Russians had an ulterior motive, which was they went after tankers, oil tankers. And every time they did, they jacked the price of oil up. Mm-hmm. And why does Russia like that? 2/3 of their government revenue comes from oil and gas sales. So their Spetsnaz people out of St. Petersburg, who are Navy, were teaching these Bedu from Somalia how to go find them. And they were told, if you don't go find a ship and board it and stop it and then we get the ransom, don't come home, because if you come home, we'll shoot you. So this was a pretty bloody group. But they had lawyers in England that would take the ransom money. It was all set up like a commercial deal, okay? So there are legitimate interests in the Arctic, which is scientific research, shipping, and oil and gas exploration.
Tell us
Perfectly
again.
legit.
Tell us those things again.
Okay. Scientific research. It could be anything. Looking at penguins in the South Pole, I guess, or polar bears in the north. And then oil and gas exploration the view is there's a lot of oil and gas up there. The problem is the Russians are pretty sloppy when it comes to the environment, and they could do tremendous harm. Plus, I don't particularly want them to have the resources. Now, there's international stuff up there, isn't owned by any particular country, but the Chinese and Russians are claiming in their literature and in their official pronouncements huge expanses of territory which are not theirs. I mean, particularly China, because China, there's no land bridge from China to the Arctic.
It makes a good public relations claim.
Yes, and the Chinese, of course, are doing the same thing in the South China Sea, claiming, the number of atolls they have claimed and then they make up a story in Chinese history. They go back 1,200 years when Emperor Banana Head supposedly had his ship went out and they claimed the land for China. Like total fairy tales, totally made up. Russia, on the other hand, is doing the same thing, except for by land, saying Ukraine is ours, the Baltics are ours. In fact, Putin wants to reclaim, he says not the Soviet Union, but he says the Russian Empire. Well, the Russian Empire, if I remember correctly, was bigger than the USSR. Okay? So Putin has his own version of expansion, and China has their own version, but it's mainly the sea. And key to this whole thing is Taiwan. And so the Chinese strategy is tie America down in Central Europe, that's Ukraine, tie America's Navy down in the Red Sea and the Suez with the Houthis trying to grab shipping. And the third is cause an incident in somewhere in South Asia, Pakistan, India, doesn't matter. Again, tying down America's Navy and Air Force. The problem with protecting Taiwan is, unlike the Arctic, the distances are huge. And we have Guam, we have South Korea, we have Japan and the Philippines. That's nothing closer. So when you want to get to Taiwan and you are facing China, which can launch everything from the mainland, whether it's cruise missiles or ballistic missiles or aiming stuff at your aircraft carriers, you have to stay a certain distance away from mainland China. Otherwise, you'll be at risk because of the missiles that they have. Now, why is Greenland important? Denmark and Greenland are kind of the view that Greenland wants to be independent. And Denmark doesn't like to be considered a colonial power. Now, I'm someone who has a great deal of fondness for the Danes and their country. They built the Thule radar in Greenland, which helps with the missile defense for the United States. It's a perfect place to see missiles coming over the pole from Russia, China, or North Korea, or even Iran. So that they helped us during the previous administrations. I believe it was President Reagan. And they were very cooperative on missile defense. They have a very top-notch military, very good capability, but it's niche capabilities. They're a relatively small country. However, they're very good friends to America. Now, I know they don't particularly want to see Greenland go as an independent country, but what President Trump, I think, is thinking, why don't we make Greenland a territory like Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, or Guam? Then they can have the benefits of being part of the United States, but they're not a state. They only have, I think, 50-some thousand people. I may be wrong, but I think that's about right. So they don't have the capital in order to do the investments necessary. But if we did mineral exploration, oil and gas exploration, I've always thought get the Canadians who are very good at building icebreakers and get them on their, get them off their duff and get them to build more because we don't have enough. We have like one or two. It's ridiculous. But put icebreakers up there, do scientific research, do mineral development, do oil and gas development, and don't hide it. Have military capability to extend our reach in order to keep the bad guys out. It's pretty simple. And that was, you take Panama. People all getting aghast about the president saying, well, we have the right to use military force in Panama. It's in the treaty. If Panama gives control over that canal to the bad guys, and they were doing this with China. China was managing each side of the port, and if they shut that down during a conflict, our Navy could not get from one coast to the other. And neither could commercial shipping or anything. So the chances that the Chinese would, it doesn't hurt them for West Coast stuff not to get to the East Coast of the United States and vice versa. So we would have under international law, and I remember my classes at Columbia University Law School on the constitutional law of American foreign policy, absolutely we have the right to keep that canal open.
Well,
and by force of arms, okay? So when you look at Greenland, well, we bought Louisiana Purchase from France. We bought Alaska from Russia, which, by the way, Putin now wants it back, saying the sale was illegal. Can you imagine giving him Alaska? And we took the 13 colonies away from Britain. I think we did buy the Philippines, Cuba, a couple others, but gave them their independence. So the idea of making this financially beneficial for both Greenland and, let's say, does Denmark get some compensation? I don't know. I mean, I'm talking totally hypothetically, but it makes a huge amount of difference because Greenland is an asset that when you add Canada and the United States together, those three are critical. And then there's Northern Europe, okay, which is Norway and Sweden and so forth, Finland. They have access near the Arctic. And then the question is then Russia and China. And those are the guys you want to keep out. But you have to, how do you keep them out if they appear to be doing
research?
Legitimate, yeah, of course. So we have the capital. We could, I mean, go to some of our Middle East friends who, I believe, the head of counterterrorism in the White House, Sebastian Gorka, wonderful, wonderful person. I worked with him at the National Defense University. He gave a talk the other day in Middleburg, Virginia, talking about that Trump got $5.5 trillion worth of investment capital from the Middle East. So take some of that and invest it in Greenland. Make the Greenlanders the richest people in the world per capita, along with Dubai or United Arab Emirates, whatever. But given and you can all do this in an environmentally sound way. Okay, it's a crazy idea of someone who did a lot of work historically on energy and still do. You know, I was special assistant to the Secretary of the Interior for energy and minerals, and was responsible for international environment and energy issues. And I worked at the UN Environment Program here in New York, and Lexington Avenue, at the UN EP Liaison Office for the Office of Energy and Environment. And there were only three of us. There was a nuclear physicist from Pakistan, Dr. Usmani. There was a nuclear physicist from India named Ganti Rao. Interesting, from India and Pakistan. And then me, an intern from Columbia University. And we did a report years ago, 1975, about the third world had been victims of the embargo, which Iran led, interestingly, the Shah. He was ticked. So he jacked the price of oil up from like $2 to $6. And the world economy went, that's why under President Ford, you had a recession. It wasn't really bad, but it was enough to tip the scales to elect President Carter. So the third world was angry because they don't have oil and gas, a lot of them. And they're saying, we're going broke having to pay these. So, and we want to do it in an environmentally sound way. So find us an environmentally sound, plentiful source of energy other than oil. Well, the three of us, Ganti Rao, Dr. Ishmani, and myself, we spent a year and a half doing a study, and we looked at everything now it was before the internet. So I had to go all over New York, but New York had a good thing. It had all the oil companies there.
That's right.
Like Exxon, and so I could
all
go.
All the corporations had headquarters in New York. How about that?
And I would call them and say, we're doing a study here at the UN. And I would get very guarded, like, oh, who are you? You're communists. So I did get to interview the senior members of some of these big companies, including the CEO of a number of them. And I came away with, they're good oil and gas people, but they have no clue what's going on, how the world is changing. So we had to write a report that said, dear third world, you can't get away from oil, gas, coal, nuclear, hydro. That's it. Solar and wind, geothermal can contribute, but 10%, 12%, and electricity, but we weren't certain about electric cars. This was 1975, so the thing is, we were told the battery would weigh more than the car, which at the time was true. Yes. I mean, the reason Tesla has those huge tires is the weight of the battery. And the problem with solar and wind is that there's intermittent, and we haven't figured out a way to store more than a certain amount, because if it comes to wind and solar in California, how do I get the energy in New York? I can't. I don't have a national grid. So even if I could, I have to store it somehow, and that's a lot of people working on it. I had a client years ago in Michigan who Unisolar, they're called, and they were building batteries for solar. In fact, I have their solar lanterns, which, interesting, a picture of the solar lantern was on the front page of the New York Times during a blackout, because someone at the Times had the Unisolar lantern, and you just turn it on, it will light up this whole room. But they didn't put a caption about who the company was that made the.
Shoo.
It was the greatest. We didn't have anything. Unisolar had nothing to do with the marketing on this, and they were working very hard on a battery for storing solar energy. And
Hey guys, just letting you know we have about 2 minutes and 12 seconds.
Peter, what you've been saying is wonderful, but please, what do you want the public to take away with them?
you have to support America building a very strong defense, both nuclear and conventional, building Iron Dome, Golden Dome. We absolutely need missile defense. That's critical. And it's not just missile defense, it's missile and air defense. Okay. Ask yourself, what would Israel be able to do with no missile defense? They'd be blackmailed into standing down. Okay? So that on the military part. Economically, we have three problems. A $1.2 trillion trade deficit, a $1.7 trillion annual budget deficit, and a $36 to $37 trillion debt.
This is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day.